morning. Welcome to Talk Tuesday. I was just saying to a group of parents, we never know how many parents we're going to get. I heard you just talk about positive parenting. Last week we had 30 parents, and this week we've got 6. And so we've got a team here, so hopefully we get some parents that tune in later on to just look at what we're talking about. And it is an interesting topic about how our kids are reported and graded on and how we use standards really to inform all of our teaching. So I'd like to start off this morning just by introducing our team here today. I'm Sarah Toa. I'm the curriculum director at the American School of Dubai, and my work is with kindergarten right through to grade 12. We'd just like you to stand up and introduce yourselves.
Good morning, I'm Christine Stancherbeck, I'm the high school principal.
Morning, I'm Mike McMillan, I'm the middle school principal.
Morning, I'm Heather Houston, I'm the high school instructional coach. And Rochelle Savoy, middle school instructional coach.
So as you can see, we've got a group of people here that are all about student learning and we're going to be talking about that this morning. So welcome to our day. We've got some thinking and talking. Oops, that's wrong. Yeah. Okay. So if you know anything about me, I always love to start with our mission. I think it's our North Star about our students and where we're always taking our students. And there's a lot to unpack in here. Every time we think about where we're taking our students. And just thinking about passionate learners that are challenging and inspiring, and that's what our standards help us to do. When we're thinking about how we develop programs and curriculum for our students, it's all about challenging and inspiring our students to become passionate learners and to take that past ASD and beyond into this ever-changing world. So that starts with our mission. So today what we're talking about is really just a group of things. We're just unpacking what a standard is. You may know this already, and it might just add to your thinking, how we use standards at our school. And then that line between standards and assessment and standards and grading is always one that we want to talk about as well. There will be time at the end for you to ask questions. So if you've got questions, hold on to them. I just gave you a pencil at your table. If you want some paper, there is some paper outside if you want to grab some, or if you've got anything, write questions down. We love to have questions and love to build understanding with our group of parents as well. So please make sure that you will save room for questions. So we want to start first off with just a little turn and talk at your tables. We're thinking about if we have 4 kids, and this timeline is across the year, and they start in different places. This is how we use our reporting standards. In high school we use, I think, adequate, but if their performance standard for Leilani starts here at limited, and then Kai, we've been enrolled, starts up here. In the end, after teaching and learning across the year, that's where they're at. Who deserves the highest score? Who deserves the high grade? So turn and talk in your group. This is just a connect in, and talk about your group, and also talk about why. Why would they deserve, who deserves the high grade and why? So talk in your group.
First of all, grow.
Yeah, I'm just saying that for the ball was halfway the game not improved,
So this is really, it's an interesting topic, because I'm hearing 2 sides of things. I'm hearing it's a bit of a trick question. We can see tremendous growth with the Leilani and Kai. They're starting off here, they're really working hard, and then in the end they all get to that exemplary. So we said the question might be, do they deserve the same grade? And it has been asked. I was looking through the past records, and it has been asked to students, and they've talked about this. So we're in a standards-based school. We're going to be talking about how we get to the end point, And if Leilani starts off here and she works hard and she studies and she does all the work and she really works hard and gets to that end point, if Raul starts here and he works hard and he's doing other things beyond and outside of, and he gets to here, they all get to that grade. So what we're saying in standards-based grading is we don't just say, well, Leilani got the most growth, so she gets more, or Raul was already at the top, so he gets more. It really is about them moving forward, learning, growing, and getting to that stage. Another thing is that I could be Leilani in one subject. I could be Leilani in English language arts, where I start off and I'm really working hard and I'm trying hard and I have to really study and really push myself and really think about my homework. I might be her in English language arts, but I might be Raul in PE, where I'm really doing well in PE and it's an easier subject for me. So when we're really thinking about that standards-based grading, it really pulls us to the end standard. It's not about averaging out or the growth. We'll talk more about that.
As an instructional coach, what we do. So part of our role is that we work with teachers to unpack the standards so we can help them in the classroom. So students, Leilani, we can help teachers get Leilani from point A to point B. That's kind of our role. So what we thought we would do is put you in the role of a teacher today. So we're going to put you, right? I know. So we're going to put you in that role. We're going to give you something to assess. And then we're going to ask you to have some conversation about that. So you are today an English teacher, and you are going to be writing or assessing an essay. We're not going to make you read the whole essay. We cut it down for you. It's too early in the morning for a whole essay. And we're going to ask you to assess it, and we're going to ask you to give it a grade, and we're just going to use letter grades for today. In high school, they use letters. In middle school, it's different. But today, it's A, B, C, D. It's a common language. So right now, I'm going to ask you to quietly read the passage, independently give it a grade, and then we're going to ask you to share it. So try not to have, try not to have the discussion until we say stop, let's have a discussion. So you are in your classroom, the door's closed, you've got 8 essays in front of you. Your job is to give it a grade. On your mark, get set, go. The actual essay is a theme essay. So you're looking at claim and conclusion, the use of evidence, and the use of reason. And as a little aside, we've asked students to use third person, check for spelling and grammar. And MLA format is just sort of an essay, writing sentences in paragraph format. But claim and conclusion, evidence and reasoning is what we're looking for. That's what the students are doing. Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do at your table. So with your group of 3, I want you to, 1, see if you had the same grade. Did you all mark it and give it the same letter? And then once you do that, did you all identify the same criteria or notice the same things that were correct or incorrect that tells you what grade it is? Kind of was there consensus? Did you find this easy or challenging? Is a good conversation. And then once you have that conversation, do you now feel confident as the teacher to give feedback? So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes right now to have that discussion, and then I'll ask someone to share. All right, if I can have everyone's attention back here. Just a few thoughts or comments on this first process. 1, did you all have the same grade at your table? Yes? No? Okay. Did you find this process easy or a little challenging? Challenging? Why is that? Do you want to share?
Yeah, I think it was about just confidence of not knowing whether it's the right, are we getting it, getting the concept of how to grade it.
Okay, so it's new, right? Like it wasn't 100% transparent what you were looking for and you didn't have that confidence. Anything else to add? Do you feel now confident to now go back to that student of this essay and say, here's how you can move through? In some ways? Okay. Now, with standards, And part of our job as an instructional coach is we work with teachers, one, to identify the standards for every assessment. So we pick learning goals for every assessment. And our goal when we do that is not to pick too many, because we want kids, we don't want it so hard for kids to go, oh, how can I do that, and then do that, and then do that, and then how can I fix all of that? So we help unpack standards with teachers. When we do that, we end up creating a rubric. So that's what a rubric is. So our rubrics, on this one we have 3 standards. The original, I'll show you, had a few more. We brought it down to 3 standards. And then what we do is give criteria for students so that they know what they're working towards. So if they're going to create, if they're going to cite textual evidence, we give them at the exemplary level what it should look like, so they know what they're working towards. What proficient is, like you've got it, and then we're ready for the, the next step, or we aren't quite there yet. And so a rubric ultimately should be a roadmap for the student first, and then for the teacher when they're assessing. So it's not just check it off at the end of an assessment, it's a roadmap that gives criteria of where students are going, get Leilani from where she is to the end of the year where we want her. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you to take this rubric, look at the criteria, and then match it against the essay. So now we'll see if your assessment is any different.
I think one thing just to add, in addition to the assessment expectations, students would also receive this at the beginning of their assessment. So this is equally a resource for the student and for the teacher.
All right, bringing it back, it's great that you started the conversation already. So maybe one, did you all have a similar grade, or did you still find you were different? Quite similar? The other table? Similar?
Yeah.
Okay. So one, rubrics, number one, make it objective, right? So we try and find a way that regardless of the teacher who was marking that, a lot of times we will take student work, we'll have 4 teachers around that piece of work, and they're all assessing it to see, are we on the same page? Like, do we see the same things? And do we recommend the same next steps for the student? So a rubric based on standards helps us keep the consistency. Was it easier or more challenging to use the rubric? Much easier, right? Because we've already thought as a teacher, what do we need this work to look like? And so that I know exactly what I'm looking for, and the student knows exactly what they're looking for, right? That you're on the same page. Now, usually in the classroom, we will, as we're teaching them, give them an exemplar to say, this is what you're working towards. Like there's a student who's already done this, we think they've done a great job, and we give that to students to say, this is what yours should look like. So they aren't kind of pulling it from the air or the sky, they have an example. Do you feel confident now to give specific feedback to help them grow? More confident? Yeah, we've identified it, right? So now, and the student can say, oh, I was adequate in this standard for evidence, and when I look at proficient, I have criteria that's going to tell me the next step that I want to go. So when we have standards, we're trying to move away from that. It is sort of holistic, but also it's a roadmap. If we just give a student an A without knowing the criteria, how do they know? How do they know where they're going? And we want to make sure we give them that roadmap. Excuse me. Do you have anything to share, Rochelle?
I think you covered.
Then I
was just gonna. The only thing I was gonna add is in the planning process, teachers are also planning ways students are practicing this ahead of time, and then so what you see is an example of an end result of a unit and then some skill practice with those standards already identified. And so this is where the student gets to demonstrate at this point what they're able to grasp, and often with standards we reassess them. And so there's going to be opportunities to use that feedback, because if we're going to tell students where the next step is, they need to have opportunities to demonstrate that feedback.
And I'm sure you've probably heard your students come home and use the words formative and summative. Mom, it's not summative, I don't have to do it. But, right? We've all heard that. But the important thing is as soon as, like, say, this summative is done, it becomes formative because we give them feedback. And then now it's formative, learn, learn, learn. Let's do another summative to see if you've learned it. And so it's really important that we encourage our kids to do their formative work, because that's where the practice comes and the learning happens. It's not like stay up all night the night before for the summative. We want to make sure, like every summative becomes a formative, because it just informs learning. All right. Mike?
Okay, over to me. Good morning, everyone. What do you think a standard is? How would you describe it now in what you have sort of experienced in that activity? What do you think a standard is? Any stabs at it? You hear teachers talk about the curriculum. We're assessing this standard. We're assessing that standard.
To me, it's like a roadmap, a guide to know where I'm trying to go to
Yeah.
as a student.
And typically in a given course subject discipline, what do you figure we would be looking at? If you're teaching, let's say, middle school math, you're looking at a document full of standards. How many do you think would be in there?
For the whole year?
Typically, yeah, it's going to be, to say it's a whole year is a really interesting question, because it's a curriculum that, yes, it could be for 1 year level. Sometimes curriculum is written for a broad, over a 6, 7, 8. And we're going to hit these standards over these times, potentially. But sure, let's say a year.
I feel like I've seen something, but I feel like there's dozens of them.
There are dozens of them, okay?
For each unit, there are standards that they multiply and they get the concept. So for each unit, there will be a different set of.
Yeah. And so do you think that when we subscribe to a curriculum, Common Core curriculum, Arrow standards, that it comes to us prepackaged in like a unit format? No, okay, it doesn't, right? It's organized by theme, right? Number, sense, and numeracy, right? Adding, subtracting, geometry and measurement, okay? And there may be a whole bunch of standards in there, okay? And so my point here is that there's lots of standards when we have a curriculum. And something that we always educate our teachers on as well is you're not expected to hit everyone. This isn't a linear thing that you're going to do. It's got to be an organic sort of process where you first really get a determination, where are our students? Who are our students? What sort of knowledge do they have? What are our units going to be? And it's something that we continue to work on, to have units that are a little bit dynamic. Not that we're rewriting things all the time, but that hit what our students need and hit those proficiencies as we move right from one grade level to another. So a standard is, yes, a learning target. It's really a sentence of a whole bunch of words that talk about what is the student supposed to learn. In many cases, it's not as content driven as you may think, right? In something like social studies, it's not necessarily saying you need to teach the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the Industrial. It's more conceptual, right? Students need to understand conflict in the world and be able to analyze and so on and so forth. In math, as our example here, it is a little bit more content driven, okay? But there does become mathematical thinking skills as well. It's a standard. And those standards, they may be able to assess more times, right? So yes, you're doing geometry, but you can assess mathematical thinking, okay? And then later you're doing a different type of mathematics, you can still assess that. So there's a lot of work that goes into looking at the curriculum documents, determining which ones are we going to teach, what sequence are we going to have in a year, what sequence are we going to have between grade levels, and how, in our middle school example, do we make sure by the time they get to the grade 9 course, they're sort of set up well. So clear learning targets, there's nice 2 easy ones there that you can see. Those would be very simple examples. They provide the ability to give very direct feedback, right? Yes, you could do this. In the case of the second standard, because standards are often jam-packed with information, which is why our coaches often spend time helping unpack them, because there's multiple things that a standard is asking teachers and students to do. You might do well in one and not well in one. This is an area of growth, this is an area of strength, okay? When we get to reporting them, I do believe the school's been on a journey in that when we started, we reported on most of our standards, and that was overwhelming because there's too many of them. So work has been done to sort of take all of the ones that we talked about and sort of limit it down in some themes for when we report. So when you see a report card and you see, a couple of grades here or a couple of numbers here, it represents a whole bunch more stuff that was happened, but we're just giving you the thematic so it's not so overwhelming, okay? And then a very important thing that, I mean, education, this is where education is now, in whatever system you happen to be in, we separate behaviors and achievement. Okay, if we go back to this essay that you saw, nobody asked, actually, I mean, I don't want to devalue the fact that we do have due dates and so on, but did the quality, was it impacted if it was handed in on a Friday or a Monday? You know, the quality of that paper, maybe the student worked on it for 2 extra days, which is why we try to control that, but we try to take some of those behaviors away from grading, okay? Was the student behaving poorly in class? Did they have their head down on the desk and sleep during class, right? They weren't interested. But then when it came time for the assessment, they did it. Okay, so we don't say, well, you slept during class, so even though your paper is good, I'm taking some marks off because I don't like that behavior. That doesn't have anything to do with the performance on the paper, all right? Class may have been, hopefully not, but boring for you and you weren't interested because you knew what you were going to do, which is why we need to differentiate for your needs. Okay, so separating behaviors from achievement is really what we're doing, and you see that on our report card as well. Okay, you see our learner development, and we provide a grade on that. This is just a bigger view of what you already visioned when we talked about what does it look like. So you can see a progression in complexity of a standard. You should also start to pick up on words that start to change. Does this one have, I thought I had an, yeah. Analyze starts to show up here, analyze shows up here, analyze is here, but is it here? No. Okay, so analysis often is one of those sort of terms that becomes a little more complex. So at a younger developmental stage, we may say, you don't need to be, you need to identify it. You need to be able to state it. Okay, then you maybe need to start to analyze it, okay, and get into higher order thinking as the descriptor goes. Any questions about this, how that looks? Okay, and if we're doing a good job in the school, we're hitting that same thing over and over again within a course and within different courses, right? And we're giving some formative feedback on it. We're giving some summative feedback, which turns formative because we do a formative and we do a summative, and we are grounded in the same thing. So overall, just some thoughts. Why standards? I mean, I think it's clear. They provide clarity. They take the guesswork out of why did I get that grade? Okay, it gives us a third point to speak to. It allows for feedback to be targeted. It allows for students to develop better understanding. And for me, this is one of the most important things that we can do when we're working with rubrics, is get ourselves to a place where we can actually start to co-construct these rubrics. We know what the standard is. So what's it going to look like for us to be really successful? If we're going to analyze authors' text, their speech, their use of literary devices, for this, what's it going to look like? And we can co-create that with students, and now our understanding is even better, right? Students should be at the highest level of assessment, be able to self-assess on the same rubric as the teacher, and we should see congruence between those two things. Okay, and last one, allow for a spiral of curriculum from simple to complex. Oops. Sometimes a little graphic, you know, used to describe, so what does that mean in terms of a grade? It just means that, yeah, we're all learning to ride a bike, but we can ride bikes at different proficiency levels, right? And in some cases, a student may need a little bit more support. 3 wheels, some training wheels, and at an exemplary level, the student is riding the bike, okay, and doing things, doing things that are exemplary. This is really good. It's not beyond what we expect, because we should be able to define also what exemplary is, and we may be able to define that exemplary is doing tricks. Exemplary is riding on 1 wheel. We're not expecting you to do that. Our expectation is to ride on 2 wheels really safely, use your brakes, so on and so forth. Exemplary is riding on 1 wheel, doing tricks, doing a backflip. That's wow, okay? But it's not beyond the scope of what we as a teacher understand. We don't say, oh, it's something I'm not even thinking of, okay? It's something that we should be able to define. Okay? Thanks.
All right, so a great segue into kind of unpacking our achievement levels. I'm sure you've all seen this on report cards that we have these achievement levels. And to Mike's point, proficient is sort of like, you know, we feel confident they've done the learning, and now we're ready to give them opportunities to grow even further in that standard, which will move us up to exemplary. But again, we need to give them those opportunities. We give them some learning opportunities so they can reach that. Now, it's not a unicorn, right? A lot of times we talk about either the A, the A+, or the exemplary. It's not a unicorn. We do provide them opportunities. If we're looking at sort of did not demonstrate, that's sort of where you probably will hear from teachers. It's like we're trying to show it, but these students haven't given us any evidence of their learning yet, which means, and a lot of times this is where the coach will come in to sort of help. How can we create new opportunities so that student, we can make sure that Leilani gets to that point. Again, limited, they're giving us a little bit of evidence of their learning, but we don't feel confident yet to assess them that they've reached that standard. Adequate and proficient or approaching, it means we see them steadily building. So if you think back to that chart, they're steadily building, but they're not quite at that point yet. And that's okay, because every student is going to learn at their own pace. Our goal is just to get them by the end of the year to that expectation for that standard. And then exemplary is where we can see it's consistent. We can see they're doing it independently multiple times, so we feel confident that they've done their learning. And then we give them opportunities to apply it in different ways, so they can be creative with their learning and they can show it. A lot of times with these achievement levels, when we're in the classroom looking at subject-specific curriculum, teachers will look at student work and notice at this level with these students, this is what we see them achieving. So we aren't expecting them to be a university student to get the highest grade. We're saying this grade 8 student at 14 years old, we see the work that all the 14-year-olds are doing, and that's how we're going to create what our descriptors look like. So it's not, again, it's not a unicorn, it's what's developmentally appropriate for those kids. And actually Christine is going to speak more to the report card, but if I look at, we were looking at evidence, right, for the essays, the first activity. So the teacher has sat down, looked at student work, and come up with these descriptors that will indicate, okay, what are we looking for kind of at proficient? And then what might it look like at that next level? So if they're going to do tricks on a bike, what does that look like for citing evidence? So we make those kind of subject specific. For subjects like English, ELA, a lot of it is skill based. So we will see similar descriptors kind of by grade level because it's a skill and we can just see them through it. Sometimes when it's content-based, it might not go for like the whole year, it's just some content that they need to show evidence of. Questions about that? Yes?
This sounds very difficult and time-consuming to put together rubrics, and I'm not. But so when is that done? Are the rubrics, once they're written for certain classes and grades, you can kind of just reuse them year after year or something, or do new assignments? It just seems like a lot of work. And I'm glad you all are glad that you're doing it, but because I think it's really, really important. But it just seems, is it done by all of the 6th grade language arts teachers together for each assignment?
Yeah, so one, that's a coach's job, right? So we help support teachers so they don't feel so overwhelmed. 2, teams get together and create rubrics so that there's a shared, a shared weight that they carry. And then they will find that the rubrics can carry from year to year. But what will happen is they'll create, especially a new rubric, ideally they get some student input. They do the assessment, we come back with the student work, and we say, did this rubric work to reflect what the students did? Then we adjust and refine, and then we use it for the next year. And so really, there is some front loading and some heavy work in the beginning, but then as we go through the years, because we see the patterns of what students are doing, it's quick refinements to make sure that we're assessing it properly. Also, to be fair, in the world of education, right, we have a hive mind, an international hive mind for rubrics. And so if we're all teaching grade 8 English, right, we've got a whole international community teaching grade 8 English, and we have places to pull from. But a very good question. It can be a lot of work, but for teachers as well, this is like the good work, right? Like kind of really thinking, how can we see the students learning? And rubrics actually make in the long run easier because it's easier to assess.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing. Sorry, I forgot I'm supposed to stand at the same time as this.
Okay.
But also the task changes, right, from year to year, student interests change, but their standards don't really change. And so when we are developing rubrics, we certainly adjust them, but the language often we call it like task neutral rubrics. So the skill might be assessed multiple times, but the task can change, but the skill isn't changing. Is that, yeah? So it is a lot of work, but we love it.
Yeah.
We're biased,
We're a little
and it is really where we're seeing the students learn. So
Yeah.
that's the front load. Sorry, so that.
Is that all right? All right, I'll invite Christine up.
So we've talked a lot about learning, and I know that what weighs heavily on students and parents is how does that learning then translate into the grade, right? Because the grade does become very important for things outside of ASD and for sort of the future opportunities of our students. When we think about the primary purpose of grading, grading was designed to provide the communication of a student's progress to parents mostly. That's why grades were given. You might remember being a student in high school or elementary school, and you would take home your report card, and that would show your parents, this is what I know, this is what I've learned. And that was probably before, in my case, it was definitely before there was so much technology where parents could kind of get this day-to-day information. And so they didn't have to wait until that report card in order to understand. The secondary purpose for grading is really to provide teachers with information about the students' abilities, and then also, in some cases, to place students appropriately. So if we get information about a student's abilities and we realize they might be misplaced, and probably they would do better in a different level of French because the grades that they are achieving based on the standards are showing that they're not really performing in an adequate level in that course. So let's look at the placement to make sure that they're adequately placed. So those are the purposes that we embrace for grading. For traditional assessment, so I want you to think about something that happened in your experience in school where you felt as if the grades were given to you not as a way for you to learn, but for another purpose. So think about what that other purpose may have been. You can talk about it.
Did you know?
Yeah. When you were in school?
When we were in school.
And you were given a grade, and you felt like that grade wasn't to help you learn, but for something else. What was that something else? Yes.
To me, the issue, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but to me, the issue and why I love this standards-based is because you have no idea, and to Mr. Dillon's point, teachers were perhaps including behavior into that grade and so forth, so you have no idea what it actually indicates.
So a big piece may have been you were late, your behavior, you were off task, and so maybe you got a 0. Did anybody in here experience like pop quiz syndrome? You know, you go into class and you get a quiz just to see if you did what you were supposed to do. And so I think there were a lot more surprises. Definitely when I was in school, there was not the clear roadmap that we've worked through with the rubrics were very far and few between. And so we weren't necessarily valuing learning as much, and we weren't necessarily providing feedback around what students had learned. And the traditional assessment where we do averages based on the entire semester or the entire year of every single thing that's been submitted kind of feeds into that idea of instead of encouraging and instead of rewarding learning, we actually punish mistakes. And so instead of punishing mistakes, really the standards-based approach is designed to reward the learning. And so if you look at the traditional assessment, where we're looking at an average, so this is where the student performed throughout, let's say, the semester, and their average in terms of the report card grade that we give is going to be right here, just a little bit above adequate, because all of those together kind of just puts the student in the middle. But if we are embracing learning, and the way in which we do that, one way in which we do that is that we look at the recent evidence. So when we're looking at the recent evidence that a student has demonstrated, then we actually see that yes, there were some challenges in the learning process, which is normal, which is expected. If they come in all the way at exemplary, then we're doing something wrong, right? We expect that we have to actually teach them something. So they come in with some limited understanding or exposure to the standard, and then they're kind of working through, and then, you know what, towards the end of the semester, they are demonstrating proficiency. And so we're rewarding that. We are using this as our grade. So we're reporting what they know by the time that they have completed that semester. And that's the difference, I think, the fundamental difference between maybe what we experience in school versus the way in which we're assessing students now.
Sorry.
Yes,
This
question?
question, 'cause I remember hearing about this in previous years and I couldn't ask. So I get that, and I support it because of what you guys were talking about, but for something like in a math or a science where a topic, or maybe even language arts, a topic covered early in the year is not necessarily wound up into what's covered at the end of the year, and could it just be they do really well in, I don't know, geometry and not, I don't know, I can't think, but like, is it, I mean, if what they're doing at the end of the year is something they're good at, but they never really mastered what happened at the beginning of the year.
Because the strands are very broad, and the students at the beginning of the year, the skill that they're practicing, even though the context may be different, like in math, even though the problem solving, even though the topic may be different, it's still problem solving. So they're still learning to problem solve as they continue throughout that course, and the assessment around problem solving will illustrate how they currently understand problem solving regardless of the topic. And so we kind of separate the content and the skills. And most of the time we're assessing the skills. That's the big piece that we're assessing, not the actual content or the topic. Does that help?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this would be an example of what you would see if you were to open up, I think if you're looking at your child's Power School, you will see that we have the strand grades, and those are in all caps, and those are the big picture that we will be assessing. Underneath the strands, we have the standards. So the different standards will feed together into those overall strands. When you go into the report card, can you go to the next one? I think it shows it a little bit better. This is middle school. Let's look at the high school report card. Okay, so this is a high school math report card that actually has 3 strands that are continuously assessed. The standards underneath those strands are continuously assessed. And what you will see then in your report card is the aggregate grade for each of those different strands based on those standards that then form the aggregate grade for the entire class. So it's divided into 3. What you see is what's divided into sort of the 3 big concepts within that class. What you don't see in the report card is the different standards that have been assessed under each of those strands. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? For middle school report card, it's similar. Just we use different.
And there's not an aggregate one
And
thing.
it's word, not letters.
So it's adequate, limited, proficient, or exemplary instead of ABCD. But we use exactly the same processes, so that the students who come to high school from middle school, they are equipped to understand the sort of the new rigor in the high school. The processes are already in place, and so they understand how they earn their grades, even in this case when their grades are descriptors of how well they're achieving.
No, that's
So what I'm hearing you say is in high school, we don't want them to read a whole word, so we give them 11.
Exactly.
And maybe Christine will want to speak to the learner development.
Right. So what we talked about earlier was separating the behavior from the academic achievement. And so what you can also see on the report card is the learner development around the learning attitude, their time management, and some of their collaboration and participation. And so it's 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And which is best, 4 or
4. Thank you for the question. It's a good question. It's a very good question. So 4 is, if we go back to the key, you can see. Was it there a key about the descriptors? Oh, okay.
No. And one thing I will just add to that is that sometimes those learning behaviors will correlate with the grade. So you'll see 3s and 4s and they'll have a higher grade. But there are sometimes when kids will have 3s and 4s because they're working hard. It's just taking them a little bit longer to reach that proficient or that level. So sometimes they will correlate and we want to support kids developing those lifelong skills for achievement. But also be aware that sometimes kids can work hard, really hard. It just takes them that little bit longer. Leilani. We love Leilani.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions about the reporting or other aspects about learning and grading? Yes.
So in high school, when the academic achievements are graded separately and the learner development is graded separately, is there a conversation that happens, especially with, I see this with my high school son, I don't know if this is with every child, but when they focus more on, they put more weight on the academic achievement, and when the learner development grades are not that good, they're kind of like, it's academic that matters, my GPA that matters. And we get that, but are the kids told, or are they, is it explained to them by teachers that how the learner development, the behavior kind of loops in to the academic achievement and that kind of supports the grades?
I mean, I think a lot of feedback around the collaboration piece, especially in class. I think in the making sure that the assignments get the timeliness and making sure that they're not procrastinating, because that's the thing that I see in high school the most, is that the students, when they feel like they're not going to be docked for late work, it can be very difficult for them to have that motivation or that sense of urgency to get everything submitted in a timely manner, which means they just kind of get themselves into this cycle of debt and they can't get caught up, right? I think for the most part, I think as Heather was saying, it really works together. I'll have a hard time seeing a student with a low learner development that is exceeding in their academic achievement. It's really difficult for that to be divorced. Okay, so maybe they're not focused on that, or they don't think that they're necessarily working towards that, but when they're working towards the standards that the teacher has put out through the rubrics, it's impossible for them to not embrace those learning development.
Yeah, it wouldn't be all 3. It would be maybe, like, say, the attitude would be maybe, a lot less. But the academics is okay, it's average. But so we want to try to improve even the learner attitude and the behavior
for sure.
And I feel like as a parent, I cannot do high school maths. I did in high school, but now I can't. But as a parent, I can influence, I can help support the learning development of my child. So that's kind of the parenting part. We can support school with that as well.
I'm taking the parenting workshop at 1 o'clock, so maybe.
And I think that's a good point too, when we're at home having conversations, how much emphasis is put on, especially in high school, just that grade that's there versus unpacking what's all there together. And so we really do rely on that homeschool partnership there, that at home it's not just looking at the academic grade, but looking at the learner development. And something for sure in advisory classes, and we do speak with students about this all the time because it is what really impacts their learning. And you're right, when there is a letter grade for an academics that's right there, that's where you go first. And so it's up to all of us to have the rest of the communication.
I mean, those conversations need to continue, though, because we can have a student whose learner development is really well and the grade may not be. As a parent or as an administrator, I'm happy to see that. I know you're doing the best you can do and marking on a proficiency level, you're achieving at what you can achieve right now. We're going to continue to support you, But that's key. And we know as we move beyond school, where we're all given these grades, and in the world of work, you don't have necessarily those descriptors, but certainly those soft skills of your time management, your organization, your collaboration are the things that actually really matter. So it's a continual conversation that we have among ourselves, with our faculty, and we want you to have with your children too.
And don't feel that you're the only parent. Raising boys in particular is an interesting experience. We're having Lisa Demore speak on February 2nd, and she's one of the world she speaks in the New York, she writes in the New York Times, she's written 3 recent books about parenting, and she talks about these exact topics, and how do you have those conversations with kids in a productive way.
So that's feedback for next steps. That's the feedback for next steps that Dr. Jordan has just provided.
I was writing her name down.
Yeah, it's February 2nd, I think it's 7 p.m. Is that right?
Okay.
She is phenomenal.
It's in the ASD news.
I'm interested. Yeah.
She is really, really, she gives practical, simple things that as a parent I use. Sometimes successfully.
All right, thank you so much for coming and for participating in the mock essay grading. That was very great. We really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out to your principal, learning coach, if you'd like to.
Actually, I have a question. The rubrics of standardized grading, is it across all the American system, or is it just something that the students? It's very common. It's like a handbook that.
It's the approach. It's the approach. Every school is going to sort of create these, even every teaching team is going to create them. But the Common Core standards that sit behind, or whatever standards, those are the same, right? For many schools, when you adopt a curriculum. There's many curriculums you can adopt out there.
And how is this grading different from the math testing? Like, do we follow the same testing? Because we get different math results and we get different school standard results. How different is it?
So math testing is based on the Common Core standards, right? It is addressing. So as we develop everything we do, we're actually grounding ourselves on the same roadmap, right, of where they should go. Math test, though, is more trying to get a snapshot of how well are they doing in these standards. Okay, and we can dive in. So that data does help us sort of, correlate what grades are we getting, how are they doing in the mock test. Difference being in the classroom, we would expect all that formative feedback and support to be allowing students to perform maybe a little bit even better, right, than potentially just on a standardized test where it's a one-off. But they are completely aligned for us because we use Common Core behind our language and math.
All right, thank you.
Okay.